on CHCH. I'm Bubba O'Neil. As you know, we love speaking to local athletes, young and old, and uncovering amazing sports stories from Southern Ontario, and in particular, the Golden Horseshoe. And folks, there are many stories to be told. Today, a look back to the seemingly ignored past of the National Hockey League and what remains a dark day in their history in Hamilton. When the National Hockey League began operation in 1917, there were teams in Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa. In 1919, the league expanded to Quebec City, which lasted only 1 year, and relocated to the city of Hamilton and were branded as the Tigers. The Hamilton Tigers had a 5-year stay in Southern Ontario, and in 1925, when the league added a second team in Montreal and a franchise in Boston, they finished the regular season in first place and were true Stanley Cup contenders. This is where the basis of today's podcast begins. And to get to the bottom of all of this, I'm pleased to introduce the president of the Hamilton and District Labor Council, Anthony Marco. Anthony, we have quite a story to be told here, and I am so glad that you have introduced this topic to us, that we can get this out to so many people, because this is a story a lot of people don't know the true details about. So thanks for coming in.
I'm happy to be here and talk about what's now a century-old story.
Now, you guys have had a press conference recently, going back to earlier to today, to kind of reveal some stories about our Hamilton franchise. Now, before we get into the deeps of this, the Hamilton Tigers were a franchise that were very, very valid in this Southern Ontario area.
Exactly, and they were a true NHL franchise. I mean, the early days of the NHL, when people think of the original six, this was pre-original six, and Hamilton had a pro team for a few years here, and were, you know, a middle of the road team for quite a few years. But in 1924-25, they led the league, what would be now the President's Cup. You know, they finished the league in first place, and at the time, the Stanley Cup was a challenge cup, so it didn't solely belong to the NHL, but by the virtue of them ending up in first place, they would have played the winner of the second and third place team to see who went on to challenge for the Stanley Cup, and they finished in first place that year, and they had a really solid team.
They really did, and they had a couple of star players as well, too, involved on their team. But, like any expansion team or any team that began, there were some rough years in the beginning. Yeah. I mean, rough in attendance and all of that, but then the team got really good, and just at the point of them getting good, I think this is where this story really kicks in, that people don't really know about, and why they ended up moving to New York. Why did the National Hockey League put pressure on the Hamilton franchise?
Well, this is where being from the Labor Council, our labor lens really kind of applies to this, because what you basically had here in professional sports, maybe certainly in professional hockey, was the first collective job action on behalf of hockey players. So the entire Tigers team, after finishing in first place, took a look at what effectively were personal services contracts. There was no such thing as player unions at the time, and they found out that they wouldn't get any compensation whatsoever for playing in the playoffs. And when they saw that, they said, hang on for a second. The owner is going to be selling tickets for the entire playoff round. They're going to be selling concessions. It was at the old Hamilton Forum down on Barton Street. So you got a few thousand tickets you're going to sell there. And why aren't we making some money off of this? And so the players, as a full team, led by their captain, Shorty Green, and a lot of people knew Shorty Green because if people remember in Hamilton back in the old days, they used to have the green fountains that came out of the ground. And that's what we nicknamed them, was Shorty Greens. Like, that's where the name came from, was from this player who eventually ended up in the Hall of Fame. He led the team and said, we deserve an extra $200. The average salary for players at that time was about $900 a year. And so to play that extra round of the playoffs, and it wasn't an 82-game season.
No.
To play for that extra round in the playoffs, or possibly even beyond that, they wanted $200. And the team owner said no. And the president of the NHL at the time came in, backed up the owner, as you would expect them to do, and basically said, not only are you not getting the $200, but we're kicking you out of the playoffs, so you don't even have a chance to contend for the Stanley Cup anymore. And at the end of that season, he fined all of the players $200 and said, we're moving the team to New York City.
So this is where Mr. Calder comes in.
Yes.
Right? I mean, and I would, based on everything you're telling me here, and I'm going to do a little pushback here. Yeah. He's the villain of this situation in that sense, and I guess he's doing everything to protect the league, because at the end of the day, it's the team and the National Hockey League kind of versus the players. That's the divide.
I think it's more, I would look at it more as the owners versus the players. I mean, so at the time, you have a Frank Calder, who's the president of the league, who's protecting the owners.
Right.
And remember, right up until the 1940s and 50s, legendary stories about Gordie Howe when he came into the league, and they told him, Gordie, you're making the most out of anybody in the entire league. Just don't talk about your salary with anybody. And he found out years later that he wasn't making the most in the league because he refused to talk about it. So the owners really held a grip on the players and the players' contracts for decades and decades and decades. And this was a good indication of how far back that went, right back to 1925. So the president, Frank Calder, who the Calder Trophy is still named after, he's still considered a legend in the NHL. He basically came in and he said, I'm backing the owners on this one. Players shouldn't get anything extra. And not only that, but I'm going to not just say you don't get it, but I'm going to punish you for even asking for it.
The amazing thing to me is when you think of sports as it stands today, when you think about those days and you think about the current times right now, this blows the minds of so many people. No players union, which really only came in many years later. No collective bargaining agreement. Basically, here's what we're paying you, and you're going to do what we want. It really, it sounds primitive, but that's what the situation was.
It was, and almost none of these players were full time. Like, it wasn't considered a full time job. Like when the off season came, they would go and find a job. They would, work selling insurance, doing whatever they did. They would go back to their farm or whatever they were doing. This wasn't considered a full time job for many of them. And so at the time, they were fighting for as many dollars as they could get. They oftentimes didn't live in the cities that they were playing in. But you figure this is post World War I. This is a time when you're just about to come up on the Depression, and times were getting rough, and these players were basically treated as an afterthought. I mean, they were certainly stars within the city. They were local celebrities within the city. They were respected by the fans of the city. And I remember at the time, I've done a bit of historical research. Shorty Green said, I would rather play nowhere other than Hamilton. This is where I want to play. But this is just about respect for the fact that we're working, and in a city like Hamilton, to have an identification of workers' rights 100 years ago being punished by ownership. It's a story that's been told a lot over the last 100 years in this city in a whole bunch of different job sectors.
Well, the crazy thing to me is this is why you have such a passionate basis of people in this city that say we were robbed of our National Hockey League team and still to this day aren't without a team. Now, I know there's been a couple of attempts, but we're still here without a hockey team.
I remember back when the expansion happened and Ottawa and Tampa Bay got their franchises, and Hamilton was in the running at that time. And I'm one of the thousands of people that put a $100 deposit down for season tickets. And I thought, okay, this is worth doing to at least see if we can get a franchise here. And I remember at that time, there was talk of this story saying, is this one of the reasons why Hamilton didn't get a team? Because there was still a grudge being held. Because at that time, there were still ownership families around from back, way back. And like the same families would still own the team, and you would say, is this a reason why? Because they still have that organizational memory that is keeping Hamilton off the NHL map.
At the end of the day, so Hamilton loses their franchise.
Hamilton.
And where'd they go? What happened?
Hamilton lost their franchise. They went to New York. They became the New York Americans. They went defunct after about a year. They were the first team to play at the original Madison Square Gardens in New York City. And Hamilton hasn't had an NHL team ever since 1925. So it's been 100 years. We're basically, we view this as the 100-year misconduct. This is the penalty that Hamilton has faced. And, that's kind of why we're trying to bring this to the attention of people. We had the press conference earlier today to tell people it's time that the NHL at least recognizes 100 years later some of the legacy. I can't say, the punishment is 100 years old, but understand the legacy, what it would mean to Hamilton to say we were a Stanley Cup champion at one point, what it would mean to some of the fans. It would have certainly carried down through the ages. It might have just kept the team here, and who knows how much longer we could have kept that team here.
Has the National Hockey League acknowledged any of this?
It's historical. They can't deny it happened, but they are very reluctant to apologize for almost anything. If you remember some of the ways that Willie O'Ree was treated back when he was the first black player to play in the NHL, and there was cries out for an apology about the way he was treated. There was never a formal apology. The NHL is very reluctant to do that. We're asking for that apology, but it holds no financial weight. There's not going to be lawsuits coming up. We just want the NHL NHL to recognize that 100 years ago, they made a mistake. They didn't recognize workers' rights. The NHLPA just signed a new collective agreement without even any job action going on strike. And funnily enough, one of the things that they included in that collective agreement was an enhanced playoff pay system where the league is paying 100% of the revenues that will end up going to the players for the playoffs, where it used to be a shared agreement between the NHLPA and the NHL. So now the NHL is paying completely for it. 100 years later, the NHL has recognized that it needs to get players remuneration for the playoffs. And 100 years ago, it said absolutely not, and we're fining you for even asking for it. We think this is a good time to be asking the NHL to recognize that that mistake was made.
Look, I know nothing about law, other than the basics. But I'm going to ask you a real general question here, because I think these are questions that people would ask me and probably want to ask you. How did they get away with this?
At the time, labor laws were very slim at best. There was certainly, I can tell you, the Labor Council, which is a group of unions from around the city, we've been around for almost 140 years now. So there have been unions at the time, but in sports, it was never considered a thing.
Why?
Just because there wasn't enough teams and there wasn't enough political pressure. It was one thing to say that you were going to shut down a steel plant, or you were going to shut down one of the building trades, or one of the trades, to say if we were all going to get together, you could shut down an entire city if you shut down some of those groups. But if you're just taking like 10 people on a hockey team and saying we're not going to play, what they would be saying is, fine, we'll find another 10 people. And because you're all on personal services contracts, we can get away with it. And a lot of people at the time didn't consider, and still to this day, people don't consider athletes, actors, whoever it is, they don't consider them workers. They are workers.
That's their job.
If you can be hired and fired by a boss, you're a worker. Whether you're making $12,000 a year, $120,000 a year, and in some cases the athletes a lot more, but they can be hired and fired almost at a whim, and they deserve the protections that everybody else gets.
It's amazing to me that that a team was lost over, basically $200. And like you said moments ago, the teams, we think about a National Hockey League team now that would have probably 25 players, players signed to two-way contracts.
Farm systems.
I can understand maybe if you look at if you transfer the situation, that you would have to look at maybe paying 50 players.
Yeah.
That teams at that time were 10 players.
Yeah.
10 players. And the additional revenue that was going to be earned is obvious.
Yeah.
And it really is a robbery. As I said, for the players, their families, and in the community, the team. It is amazing to me.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, like I said, it's 100 years later. Obviously, even the second or third generations of some of these players aren't even, some of them might not be even around today. It's hard to say. But it's about legacy. And it's about the fact that, yes, if you were a descendant of one of those players, could you have said, my grandfather won a Stanley Cup in Hamilton? Or could we have said, my grandfather talked about when he was a kid, when he was in Hamilton, going to the Hamilton Forum and watching the Hamilton Tigers win the Stanley Cup and having that banner in the rafters. First of all, I think one great thing that would be to happen is, I know that there's talk of getting another professional team here in Hamilton. It would be great if one of the things that the NHL did was hung up the equivalent of a President's Trophy banner at the new arena in Hamilton to say, you had an NHL team, you won the league that year. Any other team in the NHL gets to hang a banner like this. We should recognize 100 years later that you should be able to hang a banner like this as well. That's not one of our asks, by the way. We're just asking for the apology, but that's part of it.
It's amazing to me because in some ways the legacy kind of continued on. Like when the Hamilton Bulldogs were here, the OHL franchise, anyone that follows the team has seen that uniform, the big H, the striped jerseys, the black, the dominant black and gold coloring. I believe the Tiger Cats have had some type of second, third jersey that they wear when they wear the logo. It's kind of like they're made in the Hammer ones. It's that same H in some ways, right? So the history continues. Now, I don't know if you've reached out to anyone, and like you said, we're looking at 100 years now, so this is multiple generations past. Is there anyone, any families that maybe have contacted you or are a part of this?
We haven't been able to dive that deep at this point. And like I say, we're talking at least 2 or 3 generations, at least that many. And a lot of the players weren't necessarily even from Hamilton.
Right.
And so, for instance, someone like Shorty Green, he did go on and eventually went to the New York Americans because the team was moved, and he wanted to keep playing, and he eventually ended up as a coach, and he ended up in the Hall of Fame. So at an individual level, it certainly wasn't held against him as the leader of this movement. He eventually ended up in the Hall of Fame back in around the 1960s. So you would hope that if they forgave the leader of this movement out of Hamilton to try and get this, that they would eventually forgive the city of Hamilton as well, or ask for an apology and say, you know what, we maybe overstepped our bounds here. Maybe they could even acknowledge maybe one or two of the things they wouldn't change today, but maybe one or two of the other things they would change today, and recognize those labor rights. It was an affront to the city 100 years ago. I can't imagine what it was like to deal with that 100 years ago. If you're a fan of a team and all of a sudden have that team who's at the peak of their success just be stripped out of your city.
Montreal Expos all over again.
Exactly.
You're on the ground floor of this in many ways. I mean, did you talk to people? What was how did you form this sort of committee to get this even to this level of having a press conference?
So I mean, growing up in the city and being a hockey fan, I even remember when the Hamilton Forum was still open when I was alive, down on Barton Street across from Woodlands Park, which it was where the old Westinghouse building is. And the Forum used to be there. And if you look, there's actually a row of, there's a strip mall and some newer houses there that don't look as old as some of the other houses. I went to hockey school there when I was a kid at the Hamilton Forum when the Finn Cups were playing there and they won the 1976 Memorial Cup. So I remember the arena still being there, and a lot of people in the city still do. I'd always known about the story, but I'll admit that when it came to 2025, it didn't register in my head, 100-year anniversary or anything like that. And we had a local historian who reached out to us, and he said, hey, I was wondering if the Labor Council was going to talk about through a labor lens anything to do with this. And we said, oh, this is something, and I passed it around through our executive, and they said, yeah, this is a sports story which is going to engender some civic pride, and it should, but it's also a labor story. And to be fair, a lot of the issues that they were talking about then still exist today in many job sectors. When you think about gig workers that are out there, they don't get paid for the time that they're driving between deliveries. When you think about home care nurses, they don't necessarily get paid for their travel time. They get paid for doing their visits. So, I mean, there are a lot of people that don't get paid for the work that they do today. And it's the same as 100 years ago. And these are groups who are represented by unions, but they still are being taken advantage of. So as much as we like to say this is a historical problem, it still exists in many places today.
Okay, this is amazing to me. This is what a great story. I hope a lot of our listeners and our viewers are as amazed as I am in this, because I didn't know that. As I said, I always knew there was a team here. I didn't know why they weren't here, what happened, why it only lasted 5 years, and I didn't even know they were close to winning a Stanley Cup here. Have you gotten, or I understand what you're looking for from the National Hockey League. Do you expect them to be listening?
I think one of the things that we're doing, so we're launching a webpage with a petition on it. So at 100 Year Misconduct, 100yearmisconduct.ca, we've got a petition, and we want as many people to sign on to it as possible. And not just people from Hamilton. To be honest with you, if you're a hockey fan anywhere, especially an NHL fan anywhere, you should think to yourself, this was an affront to the players. If you respect the players' rights and all that stuff, we want people from all over the place signing on to this. So if people go onto that website, 100yearmisconduct.ca, they can sign on to the petition. But we're also going to be looking for endorsements. So we're going to be going to local politicians, whether it's city council here in Hamilton, some of the MPPs and the MPs across the city saying if they will endorse it as well, trying to get some high-profile people to jump onto it. We've reached out to the NHLPA. We haven't heard back from them yet, because to be honest with you, 100-year-old story might not have to be for the front burner for the NHLPA as they're negotiating a collective agreement, so I appreciate that. But we might even be reaching out to the CFLPA, for instance, because the CFLPA is now a member of the Canadian Labour Congress, which is what we are in Hamilton. We're the local chapter of the Canadian Labour Congress. And so reaching out to other players' associations to recognize this and say, here we're a group of athletes/workers who 100 years ago were blazing the trail for some of the benefits that a lot of these professional athletes have now. And so we want to get as many people signing on to this as possible. We are going to be out and about sharing some information. If there are people who want to jump on behalf of a group, let's say, we're going to be doing that with some of our local unions. But if there's any other major groups out there who want to sign on to this, we would certainly appreciate people letting us know through the website, and we'll certainly communicate back with them. There
has to be I mean, think of just off the top of my head, Kirk Flood in Major League Baseball, in getting free agency going. There always has to be a first. Just before I probably jump the gun here, Had you ever reached out to them previously? Has there been any communication prior to this with the National Hockey League?
No, we haven't reached out to the NHL yet, because the idea was, up until the press conference earlier today, this was something we knew the story was going to come out, but we wanted a collective effort behind it. Like if the Hamilton District Labor Council reaches out to the NHL and says we want an apology, that's not going to go too far. But if we can reach out probably, let's say, a couple of weeks from now or a month from now and say, we have 10,000 signatures, not only from Hamilton, but from across Canada, across North America, or we have 20,000 signatures saying this is some justice that can be resolved by just an apology, saying we're sorry for what we did. We recognize that these workers had the right to ask for what they asked for, and probably the punishment at the time was a bit over the top. We're not saying, like I said, we're not looking for a lawsuit 100 years later. We're not looking for any of that. It's a simple apology recognizing that a wrong was done, and can we at least respect the legacy that could have been in this city with the NHL if it wasn't taken away by one NHL president and one NHL owner.
Strength in numbers. Said it before, say it again. If you could just repeat that webpage where people can start to get on board for this idea.
Yeah, www.100yearmisconduct.ca. The 100 is a number, 100yearmisconduct.ca. And it's a simple petition. It just says, at the bottom it says, here's what we're asking for. We're asking for an apology. I know that there are some people in the city who might be even looking after this, that if we can cross this first step to try and take even further steps down the line, but that won't necessarily be a Labor Council initiative. We're hoping that the grassroots people that come together around this might actually maybe even start up their own, 1925 Hamilton Tigers, group, which says, let's try and look for more stuff, or let's find more ways that we can recognize the legacy of the NHL here in Hamilton.
It's a beautiful thing. It was only 5 years, but it actually happened.
Yeah.
And maybe one day with our brand new building, there will be an NHL team here in Hamilton, because this, as you well know, you've been part of Hamilton your whole life. Yeah. Like, when you really think about it, why not?
Yeah.
Why is there not a hockey team in Hamilton? It blows me away. And to know that there was actually history of a team being taken away from us without any of our control, without there not being attendance issues, is really, really sad. Anthony, thank you so much for letting us know about this. Continued success in getting out to the people. We'll, like I said, we'll be more than willing to help you out, whatever you need, or getting the word out. And hopefully this helps out as well too.
Sure.
But this is a story that does need some type of conclusion.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and we'll certainly keep you up to date with any updates that we hit. And you might be seeing us, like I say, as we reach out to some of the local politicians. You might be seeing this campaign further out there and at some of the summer events that we're participating in as well. We're going to try and promote this as much as possible.
I hope it does.
Yeah.
That's your Sportsline podcast for the day. And as you've just seen and heard, we love talking sports. If you do know of an athlete, team, or event to promote the Sportsline podcast, we want to hear from you. Please hit the thumbs up, like, and subscribe button. Subscribe, please. If you have something to say, here's a situation where people got to speak up. For the wonderful people that make the Sportsline podcast possible, thank you so very much. And we'll see you real soon.